Now, I've wanted to do a series revolving around real life F1 content for a while now. I've had a few ideas, like reviewing the history of teams, but that's kind of been covered by Audas. Reviewing the history of drivers, but that's pretty much covered by Josh Revel. However you say it. Then that led me down the path of reviewing all 70 seasons in Formula 1 history. I don't know if it's been done by anyone. If it has, I swear I haven't stolen the idea. Well, I haven't intentionally stolen the idea. So I could go down the predictable route and start with the 1950 season, or alternatively I could just do the fan favourite seasons to start with. But instead I thought I'd leave every episode to chance. I don't know what season I'll be reviewing until I spin a magical wheel with every season up until 2020 on it. I imagine I've put the magical wheel up on the screen. So to kickstart this series, let's spin the wheel and see what we'll be starting with. Well, on the plus side, I don't have any idea about this season. On the downside, it could be an incredibly boring season and make for a really bad first episode. The 1978 season consisted of a 16-race calendar, starting in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and ending in the briefly named Notre Dame circuit in Canada. The other tracks in order of completion included... Oh god. That track in Brazil, Kyalami in South Africa, Long Beach in America, Monaco, Zolder in Belgium, Jarama in Spain, and a stop in Sweden, Paul Ricard, Brands Hatch, Hockenheim before anything was done to stop it killing people, the Red Bull Ring before it was called the Red Bull Ring, Zandvoort, Monza, and Watkins Glen for F1's second trip to the States. 6 different drivers secured wins, 13 managing podiums, and 21 out of the possible 48 drivers scored points. Yeah, this was back in the days when drivers losing their seat happened more often than their cars actually firing up. Actually thinking about it, those numbers might actually be quite close. Speaking of the drivers, we have a long list of names I'll most likely pronounce wrong, so I'll rush through these. In the iconic JPS Lotus, we have the season champion Mario Andretti and runner-up Ronnie Peterson. At Ferrari, we had Carlos Reutemann and Gilles Villeneuve. Brabham had the defending champion Niki Lauda, John Watson and Nelson Piquet. Tyrrell had Didier Pironi and Patrick Depailler. That sounds right in my head. Wolf had Jody Scheckter and Bobby Rahal. Ligia Matra with Jacques Lafitte. Fittipaldi Automotive with, surprise surprise, Emerson Fittipaldi. McLaren had James Hunt and Patrick Tambay. Williams had Alan Jones. Arrows had Riccardo Patrese and Rolf That guy. Shadow with Clay Regazzoni and Hans Schochem-Struck. Renault with Jean-Pierre Jabouille. And Surtees with Keegan, Gimmicks, Arnoux, Brambilla and Gabbiani. Oh god, that was... I want to apologise to just everyone. The rest of the teams aren't really worth mentioning, as they all failed to score points or barely got points, and most of them just didn't even qualify. Plus I fucked up enough driver names for one video when there's still so much to go. Obviously the points system wasn't what it was back in 1978, so before we run through how the season played out, let's take a look at how the season was scored, because it's far more complicated than it needed to be. The top 6 scored points at each race, 9 points for a win, 6 for second, 4 for third, 3, 2 and 1 for the remaining drivers, and no points for the fastest lap. Now that's the easy bit. For each driver, their best 7 results from the first 8 races and their best 7 results from the final 8 races are the only results that counted towards each driver's final points tally. On the plus side, car reliability in this area was so poor that selective results don't actually make any difference. The same rules apply for the Constructors' Championship, the difference to modern day being only the highest scoring driver from each team would score points for the team. For example, if a team managed a 1-2 finish, the team would only achieve 9 points out of the 15 they actually technically achieved. Why was this rule in place? I don't fucking know. Makes no sense. But that's F1 in a nutshell. So we know most of the drivers, the ones that are important at least. The rest of you just forget about them. They don't matter. We know the point system. Let's jump into the first race to see how this season unfolded. The opening round in Argentina was fairly lacklustre, much like Albert Park is at the start of every season. Mario Andretti took pole position and dominated the race to take the win, followed by reigning champion Niki Lauda and Patrick Depailler. Reutemann was on track for P3 before an unexpected tyre issue saw him drop off the podium. James Hunt ended P4, which would be the last time he would finish a race for the next 5 races. Peterson in P5 after starting P3, and Patrick Tambay claimed P6. Round 2 would be the first time F1 would visit Rio de Janeiro, and it was Peterson setting the pace with pole position with the other Lotus in P2. However, during the race, Reutemann took the lead into turn 1 and never looked back. He took the win this time out, with Fittipaldi claiming his one podium of the season in P2, and Lauda taking another podium after both Andretti and Peterson suffered car issues. And people would complain modern F1 is boring. I'm not missing anything out. This is just how. This is all the information I have on the first 2 rounds. Nothing happened really. In South Africa we had a little more fight for the win, fitting given how this was the 300th F1 race. Lauda took pole position, once again with Andretti on the front row, who would take the lead off the line. Throughout the race, Lauda steadily fell back through the grid, being passed by Scheckter, Patrese and Depailler. It was looking good for the future champion before both Andretti and Scheckter both had similar tyre problems and Lauda's engine finally gave in. It was then looking good for Patrese until his engine blew up. Then it was looking good for Depailler until his engine started smoking. With Andretti pitting for fuel, it was down to his teammate Peterson to catch and overtake Dylan Depailler, and he'd managed this on the final lap to take his first win of the season. Depailler held on to P2 while John Watson benefited from the misfortune of others to take the final podium place. This would mean after 3 rounds the top 5 were separated by Andretti would lead on 12 points, Peterson 11, Lauda and Depailler on 10 and Reutemann with 9 points. The first race to be held in America this season saw the Ferraris lock out the front row with Reutemann ahead of Villeneuve. The 2 Ferraris however had vastly different starts, with Villeneuve taking the lead and Reutemann dropping to P4. Like most races in this era, reliability was the deciding factor for most. Watson retired from P3 with an issue, Lauda followed soon after in a similar matter which returned Reutemann into the top 2. Alan Jones was on for his best result of the season with Williams after Villeneuve collided with a backmarker, but then developed a fuel issue which dropped him just outside the points. Because of this, Reutemann was able to extend his lead and went on to take the win, home hero Andretti taking P2 and Depailler taking his 3rd podium from 4 races. After his win, Reutemann was able to take the lead in the championship, tied on points with Andretti on 18. Being the most consistent driver of the season so far, Depailler was in 3rd on 16 points. Lauda with a pointless race drops down to P10, and Fittipaldi, despite only scoring at 1 race, would remain in 6th place on 6 points. Round 5 took place in the historic streets of Monte Carlo, and it was the championship leader Reutemann taking the pole from Watson and Lauda behind. Uncharacteristically for Monaco, Watson took the lead into turn 1, something we haven't seen for about 15 years. More characteristically for Monaco, it was due to Hunt and Reutemann colliding and getting damage. I'm pretty sure there's a mistake in my research here, as apparently Watson lost the lead later on due to going off track. I have no idea where or how he could have gone off track at Monaco, but nevertheless, this let Depailler and Lauda pass them before Lauda had to pit for fresh tyres. As you'd come to expect from one of the sporting greats, Lauda battled his way back through the field to retake P2 from his teammate Watson, who then somehow went off again to lose P3 to Jody Scheckter. Despite this, I'd still give Watson the drive of the day for managing to go off twice at Monaco and not put it in the wall. Depailler came home to take his maiden victory, and with Andretti, Peterson and Reutemann having pointless races, would take the lead in the championship with almost a race in hand. After the usual dramas at Monaco, things calmed down for Belgium. This was amplified when Lotus introduced the iconic Lotus 79, a car that would later be seen as one of the most dominant Formula 1 cars of all time. To put the performance into perspective, the Lotus 79 would go on to take the win and or pole at every race for the remainder of the season bar the final race in Canada. Not to mention that for the next 8 races, Andretti would only fail to win when he retired. In Belgium, he would command the race from pole to lead a 1-2 finish for Lotus with Reutemann behind. In Spain it was a similar story, but with the 2 Lotus drivers needing to put in a little bit more effort this time. Andretti was once again on pole with Peterson alongside him, but to the shock of everyone, after 5 consecutive retirements, it was the 76 champion James Hunt who took the lead off the line. For 7 laps, then Andretti passed him and fucked off. Peterson had it a little more tricky after dropping to 9th off the line. However, the OP package he had compared to those around him saw him easily make his way back into P2 for a second Lotus 1-2 finish, with Lafitte in P3 and Hunt actually finishing a race for once, albeit for 1 point in P6. After the introduction of the Lotus 79, Andretti took his place back up at the top of the standings, with Peterson managing to get back up to second, mainly thanks to Depailler after his win not being able to score points. The 78 Swedish GP saw the introduction of the infamous Brabham fan car. As you'd come to expect when F1 teams try something new and it works, rival teams weren't happy about this, so protested the car. Regardless, Brabham would go on to use it for the Swedish GP before going back to their original design in France. With the new car, Brabham managed a P2 and 3, with Andretti taking the third consecutive pole. It was an Andretti-Lauda fight for the majority of the race, with Peterson and Patrese battling for the final podium place. Lauda would be in prime position after the mid-distance after passing Andretti, who would soon retire with an engine issue, allowing Lauda to cruise to an easy win. Further back, the battle for now P2 and 3 would continue, with Peterson picking up a slow puncher, eventually recovering to P3 with Patrese taking P2. The 78 French GP was just as eventful as the 2019 GP. Watson started pole and would go on to lead the race for half a lap. Andretti would take the lead and complete the rest of the race unchallenged to take P1. There would have been an interesting battle for P2 between Lauda and Peterson, if it wasn't for Lauda's engine showing as much motivation as Alonso with a Honda engine, and because of this Lotus would claim their third 1-2 of the season, with James Hunt not only managing to finish the race, but finishing on the podium. This would end up being his final podium in F1. So after 2 more races, Andretti still managed to hold the lead in the Drivers' Championship, with Peterson only closing up by 1 point. Lauda would jump up to third, once again joint with Depailler on points, Reutemann staying on 22 points and dropping down to 5th, and Watson trailing behind in 6th. For the first time in the new Lotus 79, it was Peterson who beat his teammate Andretti at the pole at the British GP, with Jody Scheckter in the season best P3. Andretti got to jump off the line, however, and led into the first corner, followed by Peterson and Scheckter. The Lotus cars pulled a healthy gap until they pulled a bottle that would put the 2012 McLaren team to shame. First off, Peterson's engine decided it didn't feel like battling Andretti today, then with the pressure off Andretti, pressure also left his front left tyre. Soon Andretti's engine couldn't be bothered to fight through the field anymore despite having a clear advantage, so gave up a few laps later. This left Scheckter to lead the race, albeit for a few laps until he had gearbox issues, and Lauda took the lead. Finally, after 4 different race leaders, the first actual pass for the lead was made by Reutemann as he passed Lauda in the closing laps. Oh god, reliability was shit in the 70s. Andretti and Peterson still held a 1-2 in the standings, but Lauda and Reutemann were looking like they could potentially challenge the Lotus drivers if they got their act together. For the most part, the next 3 races were a similar pattern of Lotus poles, Lotus wins, and many reliability issues, so I'll give you a quick summary. In Germany, Andretti took pole and an easy win, with his 4 closest competitors retiring with an issue. Scheckter would take his best finish of the season in P2, and Lafitte would take P3. In Austria, it was Peterson's turn to lead a 1-2 off the line, and after a collision between Andretti and Reutemann, Andretti retired and Peterson was able to keep a healthy lead. 4 laps in, a heavy rain shower hit the track, causing multiple retirements, which would cause a red flag and Reutemann to spin into the gravel. You'd receive help from the marshals to get going again, but this would result in a disqualification after the race, so we don't really need to worry about him too much anymore. The race restarted as the rain eased up, but Lauda would still spin off, leaving Peterson to take what would be his final win in F1. This left Depailler and Villeneuve to complete the podium, which would be the latter's first trip to the podium. Zandvoort was probably the most predictable and least eventful race of the season. Andretti led a Lotus 1-2 from pole position, and Lauda would take P3 after Lafitte dropped off with tyre issues. That's literally all the information I have on that race. This allowed Andretti and Peterson to both extend their lead at the front, with Andretti getting the better of Peterson and Lauda pulling 1 point ahead of Depailler. The Italian GP would mark an abrupt and unfortunate end to the championship with the death of Ronnie Peterson. The whole weekend was played with disorganisation and drama from the start, mainly due to the Ferrari fans rioting when Andretti beat Villeneuve to pole. I'll be completely honest, I've read through the reports of the crash and it's so difficult to understand what actually happened because there's so many cars involved. Basically, there was a huge pile-up involved most of the grid, which ended in a red flag and Peterson and Brambilla being hospitalised. The race would restart over 4 hours later, but the drama continued with Andretti and Villeneuve jump starting and being handed a 1-minute penalty each. Clearly back in the days when the FIA weren't scared to penalise Ferrari at Monza. The two drivers continued to battle, however, with Andretti winning on track but being demoted to P6, with Lauda inheriting the win, Watson making it a 1-2 for Brabham, and Reutemann giving Ferrari at least some positives in P3. While Brambilla would recover from his injuries, Peterson would die the following morning from his injuries, meaning Andretti would become the 1978 world champion, though obviously wouldn't go on to celebrate it. The remaining 2 races would be an understandably sad end to the season. Still mourning the loss of his teammate, Andretti would score 1 remaining pole at the penultimate race in America, but would fail to score. Reutemann would be the one to capitalise on this and finish the season with 2 podiums, including a win in America. With Lauda retiring on both occasions, this would push Reutemann to P3 in the drivers, and with a famous debut pole and win for Gilles Villeneuve at his home Grand Prix, Ferrari would jump Brabham to P2 in the Constructors, but still almost 30 points from the championship winners Lotus. Other notable performances in the final two races included a P2 for Alan Jones in America, and back-to-back podiums for Jody Scheckter. So with that, the 1978 season came to a close. Mario Andretti and Lotus are crowned the champions after a dominant year for the team. Peterson would be classified P2 and could have had a real shot at the title had tragedy not occurred, and with a strong end to the season, Reutemann would complete his best ever season in F1. In the Constructors, Lotus would take a dominant victory, with Ferrari snatching P2 with back-to-back wins in the final two races, and a painfully unreliable Brabham taking P3. So with the season summary all wrapped up, it's time for random trivia time. This is the time where I tell you some random trivia. It's pretty self-explanatory. To this day, Mario Andretti is the last American to win an F1 World Championship and is the most successful American driver ahead of 61 champion Phil Hill. 1978 would also be the last time Lotus would be champions, with Williams and McLaren entering their dominant eras in the next few years. 1978 saw the debut of two future world champions, Keke Rosberg and Nelson Piquet, both of which having pointless seasons, with a best result of P9 for Piquet and P10 for Rosberg. This season would also see the final appearance of the Swedish Grand Prix. While no talks were happening to extend the contract, the death of Swedish driver Ronnie Peterson obviously played a huge factor in the decrease in Sweden's interest in Formula 1. In honour of Gilles Villeneuve, in 1982 the Canadian circuit would be renamed to the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve in memory of the Canadian's death. With numerous lengthy delays, the 78 Italian Grand Prix would stand as the longest Grand Prix ever, a title it would hold until the 2011 Canadian Grand Prix. The 78 calendar was meant to include the Japanese GP at the Fuji Speedway to take place as the 5th round of the season. However, before the start of the season, the plans were dropped without reason. So that about wraps up everything there is to know about the 1978 season. Andretti and Lotus become champions. Monza further motivates the FIA to change the layout of the circuit, and Mercedes want around to dominate everything. Hopefully I did a good job at highlighting the highs and lows of this season. If you did enjoy, feel free to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode, as well as other F1 content. I haven't done much F1 content recently, but you know, I'm trying. And with that said, the last thing to do is spin the wheel and see what season we'll be covering in the next episode. Well, on the plus side,